There are two kinds of silence. The kind that means someone has nothing to say, and the kind that means they are building something too large for words. My mother-in-law kept the first kind for 22 years. My wife kept the second kind for 2. And when she finally opened her mouth at that boardroom table with 47 pages in her hands, the man who taught her that silence meant obedience learned what it really meant. Planning. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the morning everything ended. Or started. Depending on which side of the phone you were standing on. It was a Monday. 7 in the morning. I was on a hotel balcony near the Pont Neuf in Paris, watching the city peel itself open the way it does, slowly, with butter and indifference, when my phone rang. The screen said Russell Hargrove, my father-in-law, the CEO of Hargrove Medical Group, the man who had called me doc for 6 years, the way you would call a golden retriever buddy, with just enough affection to disguise the fact that he did not consider you a serious creature. I answered. What came through was not a conversation. It was a detonation. Russell Hargrove, 74 years old, standing in the lobby of his flagship clinic on West End Avenue in Nashville, in front of 3 nurses whose witness statements I will be grateful for until the day I die, unleashed 6 years of contempt in under 90 seconds. You think you can sit in Paris writing reports about my doctors being tired? Get back here tonight or do not bother coming back. You are done, Doc. I always knew you did not have the... I laughed, not a polite chuckle, a real laugh. The kind that starts behind your ribs and climbs out like it has been locked in a basement for 6 years and finally found the stairs. Then I hung up. On the other end, 3 nurses stood in stunned silence, and Russell Hargrove, for perhaps the first time in 30 years, was holding a dead phone and realizing he had no idea what just happened. Welcome back to the channel. Grab your coffee, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave like decent human beings. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and subscribe. You are going to want to be here for this one. Now let me back this up. This story does not start in Paris. It starts on a Tuesday evening in April, 2 years before any of this, in the basement archive of Hargrove Medical Group headquarters on Music Row. I was looking for a patient liability file from 2014 that our compliance officer swore was in Cabinet 9. It was not. What I found instead, wedged behind a row of hanging folders thick with dust, and the particular sadness of documents no one has touched in decades, was a binder. Brown leather. Cracked spine. The kind of thing that looks like it was important once and got forgotten by people who assumed importance was permanent. The label read, Hargrove Medical Group, Founding Succession Plan, 1993. I almost put it back. And I have thought about that almost every day since, because it is the distance between the life I had and the life I am living now. I sat on an overturned filing box under fluorescent lights that buzzed like they were keeping a secret, and I read, slowly, the way you read something when you can feel your heartbeat in your fingertips and you do not trust your own eyes. 31 pages of legal language designed to make a person stop reading. But I did not stop. Because here is the thing about working for your father-in-law. It is not just a job. It is a daily masterclass in exactly how much space you are allowed to take up in someone else's story. And Russell Hargrove had been writing me into the margins of his for 6 years. I found it on page 19. Section 11, Clause D. I read it once and felt my breath catch. Twice, and sat very still. A third time, and by the fourth, I was not reading anymore. I was planning. The clause said this. Any vice president of Hargrove Medical Group who is terminated without documented cause, following no fewer than 5 years of continuous full-time service, shall be entitled to succession rights, including equity compensation, equivalent to 15% of total company valuation, and the authority to convene an extraordinary board session to nominate new executive leadership. 15% of a company valued north of $90 million, and the right to call a board meeting to replace the CEO. Russell Hargrove had written his own exit door in 1993 and spent 30 years never reading the blueprint of the house he claimed to have built. Because here is what you need to understand about Russell. He did not build Hargrove Medical Group from nothing. He built it from one family practice in East Nashville in 1989, grew it during the healthcare boom of the 90s, and has been dining on that accomplishment ever since. 74 years old, 6'1", white hair maintained like a second career, and a handshake that exists primarily to remind you who is in charge. He inherited nothing, which is the one true thing about him, and he turned that single truth into a personality so aggressive it has its own gravitational field. The first time I met him, 15 years ago, Jenna brought me to Sunday dinner at his house in Belle Meade, the kind of house that has a name instead of an address. He looked me over the way a man inspects furniture his daughter dragged home from a yard sale. So you are the one Jenna has been keeping quiet about. What kind of doctor are you? Bones? Feet? Family medicine, I said. He nodded the way you nod when someone tells you they collect stamps. Useful, I suppose. That was our beginning. It never got better. For 6 years I was doc, at board meetings, Christmas parties, in front of colleagues and janitors. 6 years of a 74-year-old man compressing my entire identity into 3 letters that meant one thing. You are not one of us. 6 years. 1 clause. And a wife who had been keeping score since she was 12 years old. I needed to tell 2 people. One was my best friend, a man who never let me finish a sentence without improving it. The other was the woman whose silence I had mistaken for patience, when it was something else entirely. Something with a plan. I called Tommy Raines from the parking garage before I had even started my car. Tommy picked up on the second ring, which is the only way Tommy picks up, because the man has never once in his life let a phone ring 3 times. He treats unanswered calls the way most people treat house fires. Meet me at the Bluebird, I said. Tonight. I am buying. A pause. The Bluebird on a Tuesday? You all right? I am better than all right, Tommy. Bring your appetite for information. Another pause. Longer. You found something. It was not a question. Tommy Raines has known me for 23 years, and he can read the difference between my regular voice and my something just changed the entire trajectory of my life voice the way a doctor reads a chart. Which, I suppose, makes sense, since we met in medical school before I went into practice, and he went into hospital administration, and neither of us ever fully forgave the other for the career choice. The Bluebird Cafe sits on Hillsborough Pike in a strip mall that has no business containing something that legendary. We took a booth in the back. 2 beers. The after-work crowd was thin, someone tuning a guitar near the stage, the bartender doing that thing bartenders do when they sense a conversation they should not be part of. I told Tommy everything. The basement. The binder. Section 11, Clause D. 15%. Succession rights. Tommy stared at me for a long time. Then he picked up his beer, put it down without drinking, and said, "Say that last part again. If Russell fires me without documented cause, after 5 continuous years of full-time service, I get 15% of the company and the right to convene a board meeting to nominate a new CEO." Tommy leaned back. That is not a clause, Marcus. That is a loaded gun. It is better than a loaded gun. Guns are loud and messy. This is a legal document with a notarized signature. How long have you been there? 4 years and 3 months. He did the math. His eyes changed. You need 9 more months to hit 5 years. And then what? You just wait for him to fire you? I wait for him to fire me without cause. On my terms. After year 5. With a clean record so airtight even his lawyers cannot find a crack. Tommy looked at me, the way a man looks at his best friend, when he cannot decide if he is watching something brilliant or something dangerously unhinged. Then he leaned forward. Does Jenna know? Not yet. You need to tell her. I know. You need to tell her everything, Marcus. Because if anybody in this world has earned the right to watch that old man lose something he thought was permanent, it is her. He was not wrong. And I think I already knew that. I just needed someone to say it out loud so it would stop sounding like a fantasy and start sounding like a plan. Here is what you need to understand about Jenna before I go any further, because this story belongs to her just as much as it belongs to me, maybe more. Jenna Hargrove Webb is 41 years old. She is a former surgical nurse who left clinical work to run a nonprofit for children with chronic illness, which tells you everything about where her heart is and nothing about how sharp her mind is. She is the most observant person I have ever met. She reads people the way radiologists read scans, seeing things beneath the surface that the rest of us miss entirely. She has her mother's kindness and her father's brain, and she has spent the better part of her adult life being grateful for one and quietly furious about the other. Russell Hargrove married Vivian Calloway in 1978. By all accounts, the early years were good. But Russell had a way of growing into his worst qualities, the way some men grow into money. Slowly at first, then all at once. And by the time Jenna was 12 years old, the house in Belmead was not a safe place to have feelings. Russell did not hit. He was too image conscious for that, too aware of how violence looks on a man of his stature. What he did instead was quieter and harder to prove. He controlled the finances so completely that Vivian did not have a credit card in her own name for 22 years. He spoke over her at dinner parties. He corrected her in front of guests with the precision of a surgeon who enjoys the incision more than the healing. He managed her the way he managed his clinics, monitoring every expenditure, questioning every decision, making her feel like a liability he was generously choosing to carry. Jenna watched all of it. Every dinner, every correction, every quiet moment where her mother's shoulders would drop half an inch and she would excuse herself from the table and not come back for 20 minutes. Jenna counted those minutes. She told me once that the longest was 37. Thanksgiving 1994. She was 16. Vivian finally left when Jenna was 19. She packed one bag on a Wednesday morning while Russell was at the office, drove herself to her sister's house in Chattanooga, and before she walked out the door, she knelt in front of Jenna and said something that Jenna has carried every single day since. "I am not leaving you. I am saving what is left of me." Russell's response was textbook. Wounded in public, vicious in private. The divorce took 2 years and cost Vivian more than it should have, because Russell had lawyers and patience and a man's particular ability to treat cruelty like strategy. Jenna never forgave him. Not fully. The forgiveness Russell Hargrove got from his daughter was the functional kind. The kind that lets you sit across a Sunday dinner table without reaching for the wrong utensil. She maintained the relationship because Vivian asked her to, and because Jenna understood that burning the bridge would cost her more than it cost him. But she never stopped keeping score. Which is why I knew, sitting in that booth at the Bluebird with Tommy Raines and 2 beers going warm between us, that when I showed her Section 11, Clause D, she would not gasp, she would not panic. She would read it 3 times, slower than I had. And then she would start planning. That evening, I spread the founding documents between our coffee mugs on the kitchen table in Sylvan Park. The same oak table where we decided to get married. The same table where we decided not to have children because we wanted to pour ourselves into work that mattered. The same table that was about to decide Russell Hargrove's future, though he was 3 miles away in Belmead, finishing his steak, and had absolutely no idea. Jenna sat across from me and read Section 11, Clause D, 3 times. She read it the way she reads everything. Slowly. Completely. The way a woman reads something when she has been waiting her entire adult life for a piece of paper that finally puts a number on what was taken from her family. She did not gasp. She did not ask if I was sure. She looked up from the document and said, "He has never once read these, has he?" It was not a question. "He built this company from one clinic in East Nashville," I said. "Signed every founding document in 1993. Never looked at them again." Something moved across Jenna's face. I have replayed that moment 1,000 times, and I still cannot name what I saw. It was not anger. Anger is fast and hot and burns itself out. This was slower, colder, more methodical. Like watching someone open a drawer they have kept locked for a very long time and finding that everything inside is exactly where they left it. He made my mother feel worthless for 22 years, she said quietly. Made her believe she was a line item on his balance sheet. He made me feel like I married down because I chose someone he did not approve of. She paused. He has called you doc for 6 years, Marcus. 6 years. Like your medical degree was a participation trophy. He was generous enough to display on his shelf. She looked back down at the document. What do you need from me? That question. 5 words. I have turned them over in my mind so many times they are smooth as river stones now, because what I heard was a woman offering to help her husband. What Jenna meant was something larger. Something I would not fully understand until she stood in that boardroom with 47 pages in her hands and a look on her face that I had never seen in 15 years of marriage. But that was 2 years away. And we had work to do. The plan required 2 things from me: patience and provocation. I needed to complete my 6th year with a service record so clean you could perform surgery on it, while simultaneously making myself just irritating enough to keep Russell's finger hovering over the trigger. Not enough to give him documented cause. Just enough to keep the temperature rising. Jenna called it strategic aggravation. I called it the most exhausting performance of my life. For 2 full years, I did everything right on paper and everything wrong in Russell Hargrove's gut. I questioned his decisions at board meetings, politely, with data, which is somehow worse than rudeness to a man who built his identity on being unquestioned. I copied Claire Dawson, our head of legal, on emails that Russell would have preferred stayed between us. I took my full lunch hour every single day. I stopped laughing at his golf stories. I started arriving at exactly 9 and leaving at exactly 5, which in Russell Hargrove's world was the medical equivalent of abandoning your patients in a burning building. You have been different lately, Doc, Russell told me one morning. He was standing in the hallway, outside the 6th floor conference room, stirring his coffee with the slow deliberation of a man who has watched too many movies about powerful people. Something on your mind? Just focused on the patient, sir, I said. Outcomes are looking strong this quarter. He did not like that answer. He wanted contrition. I gave him competence. And competence made Russell Hargrove angrier than anything else I could have offered, because competence meant he could not fire me for performance, and that meant the only weapon he had left was his temper, which was exactly where I needed him. Dale Hutchins, Russell's VP and personal echo, had already started whispering. I found this out from Helen Booker, our office manager, who heard everything that happened on every floor of that building and said nothing about any of it, which made her quietly the most powerful person in the company. Dale had been telling Russell that I was getting too comfortable, that I was building something, that my questions at board meetings were not curiosity but architecture. Dale was right about the architecture. He was just wrong about what I was building. Meanwhile, Jenna was building something of her own. I noticed it in small ways at first. She started coming home later, on Tuesdays and Thursdays. There were phone calls she would take in the backyard, pacing slowly along the fence line, speaking in the low, steady voice she used when she was listening more than talking. Her laptop stayed open on the dining room table with documents I never looked at, because Jenna had asked me not to. And when your wife asks you to trust her without explanation after 15 years of marriage, you trust her. I assumed she was working on something for her nonprofit, planning a fundraiser, organizing a volunteer initiative. The kinds of things Jenna poured herself into with the intensity of a woman who had turned compassion into a profession. I was wrong. But I would not find out how wrong for another 2 years. What I did know was that every Sunday, we drove to Belmead for dinner at Russell's house. Jenna and I sat across from Russell and Constance, his second wife, a pleasant woman from Germantown who had learned within 6 months of marriage that opinions were not welcome at Russell Hargrove's table. We ate. We smiled. We played the roles that Russell had assigned us in a story he believed he was the only author of. And every Sunday evening, driving home on West End Avenue with the Nashville skyline glowing through the windshield, Jenna would be quiet for exactly 3 blocks. Then she would say something small, something precise, something that told me she was tracking every detail with the patience of a woman who had been doing this since she was 12 years old and had never once lost count. He interrupted Constance 4 times tonight, she said once. 4 times in 90 minutes. And she just kept smiling. I looked at my wife. The streetlights moved across her face in slow intervals. She was not angry. She was documenting. I did not know it yet, but while I was playing the long game in boardrooms and hallways, Jenna was playing a longer one. In living rooms and coffee shops and quiet phone calls that lasted hours. 89 of them, to be exact. 89 conversations with current and former employees of Hargrove Medical Group. 89 people who had something to say about Russell Hargrove and had never been asked. But I am getting ahead of myself again. Because before Jenna's 47 pages would change everything, we had to get Russell to pull the trigger. And for that, we needed Paris. Then came the Paris idea. And like everything that actually worked in this plan, it came from Jenna. She planted it at Sunday dinner in Belmead, which was the only soil where it could grow, because Russell Hargrove would never have accepted the idea if it had come from me. Everything had to pass through channels he believed he controlled. It was early May. The dining room at Russell's house smelled the way it always did, like roasted meat and authority. Russell at the head, Constance to his right, arranging her napkin with the careful precision of a woman who had learned that even small movements could attract the wrong kind of attention. Jenna and I across from them, playing the same roles we had played every Sunday for 6 years. Jenna waited until dessert. She always had a sense of timing that would make a surgeon jealous. Marcus has a medical conference in Paris next month, she said, refilling her water glass without looking up. 10 days. International panel on physician burnout and clinic sustainability. He has the invitation. HR has already approved the leave. Constance brightened. Paris? Oh, how wonderful. I have always wanted to go back. Russell was cutting his pecan pie. He did not look up. 10 days is a long time to leave patients without their lead physician. His leave is fully approved, Jenna said. Claire Dawson signed off. She looked at me. Right? Fully approved, I said. Took a calm sip of sweet tea. Russell raised his eyes and looked at me across the table with the particular expression of a man who knows something is happening but cannot locate exactly what it is. I held his gaze just long enough to be comfortable, not long enough to be a challenge. Have fun, Doc, he said, like it cost him something. It cost him everything. He just did not know it yet. We landed in Paris on a Thursday morning in early June. The hotel was a narrow building near the Pont Neuf with iron balconies and a view of the Seine that made you feel like the world had been doing just fine for a very long time, without Russell Hargrove's opinion about anything. That first evening, Jenna and I stood on the balcony. She touched her wine glass to mine and said, "How many days?" 6, I said. Tommy gave him 72 hours before he could not stand it. I gave him 6 days. I know him better. Jenna smiled. The real one. The one that 6 years of Sunday dinners at Belmead had made rare enough that I kept count. 14. That was the number of real smiles I had seen from my wife in Russell Hargrove's presence over 6 years. I kept count the way she kept count of everything else. Day 2, I attended the conference. It was real. The panels were real. The research was real. Physician burnout is a genuine crisis, and I cared about it genuinely, which was the beautiful thing about this particular trap. Nothing about it was fake, except Russell's assumption that I did not deserve to be there. Day 3. I sent a photo to a group chat with colleagues. The conference hall. Croissants. A caption that read, "Learning incredible things about sustainable practice models." I knew Dale Hutchins was in that group chat. I knew Dale would mention it to Russell before lunch. Day 4, I made my move. I sent a formal report to the full board of Hargrove Medical Group. 14 pages on physician burnout rates across all 12 clinics, with data I had been quietly gathering for 8 months. Recommendations included reduced on-call hours, mandatory rest periods, and a restructured scheduling system. It was thorough, professional, and evidence-based. It was also the single most provocative document I could have sent to a man who believed that exhaustion was a character flaw, and rest was a luxury for people who had not earned their position. The report traveled from the board to Dale to Russell in under 4 hours. Water finding its level. Day 5. Jenna sent Constance a short video from a rooftop restaurant in the Marais, the city glowing beneath us. Music, laughter. Constance forwarded it to Russell within the hour. She always did. Day 6 was Monday. I was on the balcony at dawn, coffee in hand, Paris opening itself to the morning the way it has for centuries, golden and unhurried and profoundly indifferent to the ambitions of men who think their names matter more than they do. My phone rang at 7. I looked at the screen, then through the glass door at Jenna sitting on the bed. She looked up from her book. Her eyes met mine, and she nodded once, the way a surgeon nods before the first incision. Steady. Certain. Already 3 steps ahead. I answered. Russell did not say hello. He said, "What in the hell do you think you are doing?" That voice. 3 decades of employees had bent under that voice. My doctors are calling me about workload reports, and you are sitting in France, eating pastries, and pretending to care about burnout. You want to talk about burnout? I will show you burnout. You come back tonight, you hear me? Tonight. Or do not bother coming back at all. You are done, Doc. Done. Lazy. Ungrateful. And I always knew you did not have the... I did not let him finish. Not because I was afraid of what he would say, but because I had waited 2 years for this exact sentence, and I did not need to hear the ending. The termination was already complete. Verbal. Without documented cause. In front of witnesses. On an approved medical conference leave. After 6 years and 4 months of continuous service. The clause required 5 years. The math was simple. I laughed. And this time I want you to understand what that laugh was. It was not cruelty. It was not gloating. It was the sound of a man exhaling something that had been compressing inside his chest for 6 years. Every doc. Every smirk. Every Sunday dinner where I swallowed something that should have been said out loud. It all came out in one sound. Then I hung up the phone, and the line between us went dead in a way that was much larger than cellular. Jenna was in the doorway. Did he say it? All of it. In front of 3 nurses. She walked over, took the coffee from my hand, drank from it, and handed it back. Below us, the Seine moved the way it always has. Slow. Ancient. Completely uninterested in the kingdoms of small men. So what now, she said. Now we finish our conference. And then we go home and collect what was always ours. We had 4 days left in Paris. Neither of us wasted a single one. But something had shifted behind Jenna's eyes. Something patient and focused, and 47 pages long. Something she had been building in silence while I had been building in boardrooms. And I was about to find out that my wife's silence had never been empty. It had been full. Fuller than anything Russell Hargrove had ever constructed in 30 years of believing he was the loudest voice in every room. There is a specific kind of silence that greets a man who just got fired over the phone in Paris and chose to finish his conference, attend 2 more panels on physician wellness, and eat a croque-monsieur in the Luxembourg Gardens before boarding his flight home. I know this because that silence met me at Nashville International on a Sunday afternoon and followed me through baggage claim like a stray dog that had decided I was its responsibility now. Jenna drove. She always drives when something important is happening. She says it keeps her focused. I have always suspected it is because she likes being in control of the vehicle when the world outside it is about to catch fire. You ready? She said, merging onto Briley Parkway. I have been ready for 2 years. That is not what I asked. I looked at her. Yeah, I said. I am ready. She nodded. Her grip on the wheel loosened just slightly. I noticed. I did not say anything. That is 15 years of marriage working exactly the way it is supposed to. We did not go to the office. Sunday was for unpacking, regrouping, and letting Russell marinate in whatever he had been cooking since Monday. The most powerful thing you can do to a man who needs control is give him nothing. No calls, no emails, just silence. And silence to a man like Russell is absolutely deafening. Tommy came by that evening with a bottle of Woodford Reserve and the energy of a man who had been counting the hours since my phone call from Paris. Walk me through it, he said. settling into my armchair like he owned it. So I did. When I got to the part where I laughed and hung up, Tommy covered his face with both hands and made a sound somewhere between a groan and a prayer. You hung up on Russell Hargrove. Mid-sentence. He looked at Jenna. Is he always like this? 15 years, she said, pouring herself a glass. You get used to it. Tommy raised his bourbon. To Section 11, Clause D. We drank to that. All three of us. And for about 45 minutes, sitting in our living room in Sylvan Park with the ceiling fan turning slow and Nashville doing its warm June thing outside the windows, everything felt almost too easy. I did not know it yet, but easy was about to take an extended leave of absence. Monday morning, I put on the charcoal suit. The one Jenna picked out 2 Christmases ago that Russell once called a bit much for a medical office. I parked in my usual spot, took the elevator to the 6th floor, and walked through the glass doors of Hargrove Medical Group at exactly 8:59. The reception area went quiet. Helen Booker looked up and her face did 3 things: relief, panic, then the mask she had spent 20 years perfecting. Morning, Helen. Dr. Webb. I was not sure we would be seeing you today. Why would you not? She glanced down the hallway toward Russell's corner office. Mr. Hargrove called a department head meeting for 9. Perfect. I love department head meetings. The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Nashville skyline. Russell was at the head of the table. Dale Hutchins to his left, positioned with the precision of a man whose entire career strategy was proximity. Margaret Torres at the far end, scrolling her phone with the focused disinterest of a woman patiently waiting for the one thing worth seeing. Russell looked up. His face did not flinch. What crossed it was slower. Recalibration. Like a chess player watching a move he had not anticipated. He chose furious. He always chose furious. Marcus, he said. The way you say the name of a dog that has chewed through its leash. Russell, I said. The way you say the name of a man who does not know he has already lost. I sat down, poured myself coffee. Slowly. Nobody spoke. You were terminated, Russell said quietly, over the phone, while I was on an approved medical conference. Yes. I took a sip. This is good. Did we switch blends? Dale started to speak. Russell silenced him with a look, which was the most exercise Dale's independent judgment had received in years. I would like to talk to Claire, I said. Claire Dawson. Your head of legal. HR questions. Routine stuff. I said routine, the way you say something that is the opposite of routine. Russell's jaw was grinding. That slow thing Jenna told me he had done since childhood. Get out of my building, he said. Sure. I stood, buttoned my jacket. Tell Claire I will be at the Bluebird. I looked around the table. Good seeing everyone. Margaret, love that jacket. Margaret Torres pressed her lips together firmly to contain something that was almost certainly a smile. Claire Dawson called at 11:47. I was on my second coffee at the Bluebird, which was not technically open, but whose owner owed Tommy a favor from a story I had never been told. I think we need to meet, Claire said. She had the voice of a woman who had delivered difficult news so many times it had become flat terrain. Not at the office, she added. A pause that told me everything. Claire had spent her morning reading a document she had never read before. The Bluebird, Hillsborough Pike. 1 o'clock. Claire arrived at 1 exactly. 52, trim, blazer the color of thunderclouds, leather portfolio that absolutely contained a highlighted copy of Section 11, Clause D. The clause is enforceable, she said. I spent 3 days trying to tell you otherwise. I cannot. She opened the portfolio. Highlighted yellow. Margin notes in tight cursive. He is going to fight this, she said. I know. She exhaled long and slow, like releasing something held too long. He told my paralegal she was too emotional for legal work. In front of the entire department. She is 26. Graduated top of her class at Vanderbilt. She closed the portfolio. You need outside counsel. Obvious conflict. But I know who you should call. She slid a business card across the table. She is exceptional, and she will love this case. One more thing. Board meets Thursday. Margaret Torres chairs governance. She held my gaze 1 second longer than necessary. Attendance is open to any active stakeholder. She took one sip of water and walked out. I looked at the card. Victoria Chen. Then I called Jenna. It is moving. How fast? Faster than he can keep up with. On the other end, Jenna laughed. The real one. Then she said something I did not understand until 3 days later. Good. I am almost finished. Finished with what? I almost asked. But when your wife has spent 2 years building something in silence and asks you to trust her, you trust her. Even when you have no idea what she is holding. Even when it turns out to be 47 pages that no one in that building, including me, ever saw coming. Thursday was 4 days away. Victoria Chen had a case to build. Claire had a conscience to follow. And Jenna had something in a locked drawer in Sylvan Park that was about to end a 30-year reign. Thursday came the way it always does in Nashville. Slowly, with humidity, and completely indifferent to the fact that everything was about to change. I was up at 5:30, showered, dressed, standing in the kitchen in the charcoal suit, while Nashville did its slow golden morning thing outside the window. Jenna came downstairs at 6. She did not say good morning. She walked to the cabinet, pulled out 2 mugs, and poured. Today, she said. Not a question. Today, we drank in silence. It was the most married we had ever felt in 15 years together, which is saying something considerable. And when Jenna set her mug down, she reached under the kitchen table and pulled out a leather binder I had never seen before. Dark brown. Thick. The kind of object that looks like it has weight beyond its pages. What is that? I said. She looked at me with an expression I will spend the rest of my life trying to describe. It was calm and fierce and tender all at the same time, like a woman who has been carrying something heavy for a very long distance and has finally reached the place where she can set it down. Trust me, she said. I did. We arrived at Hargrove Medical Group at 8:40. Victoria Chen walked beside me through the lobby. She was 50 years old, 5'6", and moved through space with the quiet authority of a woman who had won 38 of 41 cases and did not need to announce any of them. Helen Booker looked up from her desk, saw both of us, and reached for her phone. Do not bother, I said. We know the way. The 6th floor conference room. The same windows overlooking Nashville. The same table. But the room felt different today. Charged. Like the air before a summer storm when the pressure drops and everything living goes quiet. Russell was at the head. Reading glasses on. 74 years old and refusing to acknowledge a single one of them. Dale Hutchins to his left, clutching his notepad. Claire Dawson sat in the exact middle of the table. Not Russell's side. Not mine. Which told the room everything it needed to know. Margaret Torres was at the far end with a legal pad, reading glasses, and the patience of a woman who had been waiting for this particular Thursday longer than she had ever admitted to anyone. Victoria distributed 12 bound copies of Section 11, Clause D without ceremony or preamble. She set them on the table the way a dealer lays down cards. The room read. The room went quiet. Russell's jaw started grinding. This is a stunt, he said. It is a clause, Mr. Hargrove, Victoria said in the precise tone of a woman who had corrected more powerful men than him before breakfast. A legally binding clause in your own founding document. Dr. Webb was terminated without documented cause, after 6 years and 4 months of continuous service. The threshold is 5 years. The math is not complicated. I want Claire to tell them it is unenforceable, Russell said. Claire looked up from her portfolio. The clause is enforceable. I spent 3 days looking for a way to tell you otherwise, and I cannot. She said it the way a surgeon delivers a prognosis. Clean. Final. I am sorry. Something crossed Russell's face that I had never seen in 6 years. The specific expression of a man who has just discovered that the walls of his kingdom are not where he thought they were. He turned to me and made the mistake that men like him always make when the room gets smaller. He went personal. "You never belonged here," he said. Low, controlled. The voice that had made Vivian excuse herself from dinner tables for 22 years. "I gave you this job because my daughter begged me to. You could not build your own practice. Could not make it on your own. You have been a passenger since day one, Doc. A well-dressed, ungrateful passenger. And now you want to stand there and claim 15% of something you had absolutely nothing to do with building. Dad." Every head turned. Jenna was at the back of the room. She had been sitting in a chair near the door, so still and quiet that everyone had assumed she was one of Victoria's associates. She stood up, smoothed her jacket, picked up the leather binder from the seat beside her, and walked to the center of the room with the unhurried deliberateness of a woman who had been waiting 41 years to arrive at this exact moment. Russell's face did something complicated. Jenna set the binder on the table, opened it. 47 pages. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "This is a report," she said. 89 current and former employees of Hargrove Medical Group. 2 years of documented interviews. Patterns of verbal abuse, financial intimidation, wrongful termination, and systemic disrespect under your leadership. Every statement signed. Every incident dated. She looked at her father. "You spent 30 years telling people their feelings did not count as evidence. So I brought you evidence." The room did not breathe. Then her voice shifted. Quieter. Not for the room anymore. Just for him. "I watched you make Mom excuse herself from the dinner table. Every Sunday for 7 years, she would come back 20 minutes later with her eyes too bright, and you would just keep talking like she did not matter enough to pause a sentence for." She stopped 5 feet from him. "I watched her pack one bag and drive to Chattanooga because staying had become something she physically could not do anymore. And then you spent 2 years punishing her for leaving." Jenna looked at Russell. The way you look at something you have finally decided to put down. "You gave Marcus this job out of pity and called him Doc for 6 years and told a room full of people he was one of the good ones, like he needed your permission to exist. You built this company on your employees' silence and your family's patience, and today both of those things ran out." She paused. "The longest pause I have ever heard. I love you because you are my father. I have never once been proud of the man you chose to become." She walked back to her seat. The room was so quiet, I could hear the air conditioning. Margaret Torres cleared her throat. "All in favor of recognizing Dr. Webb's succession claim under Section 11, Clause D." 7 hands. Every hand at that table except Russell's and Dale's. Russell sat in silence. It did not matter. He was already finished. And somewhere in those 47 pages, on page 31, paragraph 4, was a name he had overlooked for 20 years. A doctor who had given more to his company than he ever deserved. A woman whose patience had outlasted his arrogance by 2 decades. Dr. Patricia Owens. The rest happened the way real consequences always happen. Not in one dramatic moment, but in accumulating weight. The slow, unglamorous arithmetic of a man's life catching up with the lies he told about it. Helen Booker walked into Victoria Chen's office on Friday morning carrying a manila folder she had kept in her desk drawer for 5 years. Victoria went very still when she opened it. By the end of that week, 14 former employees of Hargrove Medical Group had come forward. Wrongful termination, hostile work environment, a discrimination complaint from a nurse practitioner who had been waiting 19 months for exactly this kind of momentum. Each case was individual. Together they were a demolition. Russell's legal bills compounded daily. His attorneys stopped softening the numbers. The board convened an emergency session the following Thursday. Margaret Torres chaired it with the calm efficiency of a woman who had been preparing for this vote longer than anyone knew. Russell was removed as CEO by unanimous decision. He resisted selling his equity for 2 weeks. The resistance of a man who understands that selling means admitting. Then he stopped resisting. Because pride is expensive, and he had finally run the math on what it costs to fight a war on 7 fronts with no allies. He sold to the board quietly on a Thursday afternoon. No ceremony, no photograph in the lobby, just a signature on a document in a building that had already moved on before he stood up to leave. Then came the part no one expected, including me. The new board convened. Margaret Torres at the head of the table, Victoria Chen as outside counsel, Claire Dawson back in her seat with something in her posture that looked like relief. Every face in that room turned to me. The math was obvious. I held succession rights. I had the legal standing, the institutional knowledge, and the sympathy of every person in that building who had spent years being made to feel small. They were waiting for me to take the throne. I stood up, and I said something that made Tommy Raines call me 3 times that evening in increasing volume, asking if I had lost my mind. I did not come here to run his company, I said. I came here to make sure the people who actually built it finally get what they deserve. I nominated Dr. Patricia Owens. The room was quiet for a moment. Patricia was sitting 3 chairs down, 58 years old, 20 years at Hargrove Medical Group. She had run the East Nashville Clinic since before most of the board members knew what a P&L statement was. She had trained more young doctors than Russell had ever bothered to count. She had submitted 11 proposals for clinic improvement over the past decade. Russell had ignored every single one. He had never learned her name well enough to pronounce it correctly at the Christmas party. Twice he called her Patricia Stevens. Once he called her Pat. When the vote went through, Patricia stood up. She did not make a speech. She pressed her hand flat against the conference table like she was steadying herself against something she had stopped believing would ever arrive. Her eyes were bright. She nodded once, and that was enough. Tommy called that evening. 3 times, like I said. You had the keys to a $90 million company, and you handed them to someone else. I never wanted the company, Tommy. Then what did you want? I wanted a man who spent his entire life making people feel small to finally understand what it feels like to sit at the same level as everyone he looked down on. That happened. Everything else is paperwork. The number I received for my 15% was more than enough to leave, more than enough to start over, more than enough to never hear the word doc used as a demotion again. Jenna and I sat at the kitchen table in Sylvan Park one last time. Same oak table, same mugs. The table where I had spread those founding documents 2 years ago and changed everything. The table where we had decided to get married. The table where we had decided what kind of life we wanted, and then went out and fought for it. Where, she said. Somewhere that does not know his name. She looked out the window. Nashville morning light. The trees along our street heavy with summer. 8 years of Tennessee. She set down her mug. I will start packing. We were gone by August. Vivian heard the full story from Jenna over the phone. When Jenna finished, her mother was quiet for a long time. The kind of silence that used to mean one thing and now meant something else entirely. Then Vivian spoke with the calm of a woman who had earned every single syllable. He always thought silence meant agreement. He never once considered that it might mean we were planning. Then she asked if Jenna wanted to come to Chattanooga for a long weekend. Jenna said yes before her mother finished the sentence. We opened a small family practice in Chattanooga that fall. Nothing fancy. A brick building on a quiet street near the river. The kind of place where patients know your name and you know theirs, and nobody calls anyone anything they have not chosen for themselves. Jenna runs the operations. Vivian stops by on Wednesdays with food she insists we cannot make as well as she can. She is right. Tommy calls every Sunday. One evening, months after we had left Nashville, he asked if I missed it. I thought about the 6th floor, the charcoal suit, the basement archive on a Tuesday evening in April that started everything, the fluorescent lights buzzing like they were keeping a secret. Not even a little, I said. Some men spend their whole lives building kingdoms. Russell Hargrove built one for 30 years and lost it on a Thursday in June because he called his son-in-law a lazy, ungrateful passenger from a continent away and could not finish the sentence before the line went dead. 6 years of doc. 1 clause. 1 patient man. And a woman who had been keeping score since she was 12 years old and never once lost count. I have learned something in the time since. God has a way of placing things exactly where they need to be found, even if it takes decades for someone to reach for them. A binder in a basement. A clause on page 19. A daughter who remembered every dinner. God places the evidence in plain sight, and then waits, with the patience only God has, for the right person to finally open the drawer. And sometimes, God's loudest work is done in the quietest rooms, by people who spent years being told their silence meant they had nothing to say. There are two kinds of silence. The kind that means you have given up, and the kind that means you are just getting started. If you have ever been the second kind, this story was for you. If it reached something inside you, I would be grateful if you shared it with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you have not yet, subscribe to this channel so you do not miss the stories that remind us what patience, faith, and quiet courage can do when the world underestimates the people who possess them. As always, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for believing that the quiet ones are sometimes the most dangerous ones of all.